Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Another Gaming Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Alex, ReturnToMotherBase, doing a little bit something different today. So, I'm by myself. The guys are indisposed. As Steven and I mentioned in the last episode dealing with the aftermath of us playing Final Fantasy XII and our basically absolute enjoyment of it, life attacked all of us at the same time, and everybody is busy doing other things in the real world. And as it happens with everybody, I happen to have the most free time, primarily because I don't sleep. So I ran this idea by Steven the other day, and I'd asked, just for the sake of putting out more content for the podcast, what if I were to do a solo episode here and there, or somebody else on the podcast were to do one, or some such thing or another, considering we're already doing mini episodes. And he raised a good point. He was like, well, I know I'm cool with that. But for your channel on YouTube, you pretty much just do like a little vloggy thing. So wouldn't that be kind of the same content? And on one stretch, yeah, he's right. Probably would be like that, but there are certain things I would like to talk about that don't really fit with what I do with the channel, whether they be, more of like a topic du jour sort of thing. I tend to just, do pickups, what I finished, and then talk about games that have some substantial meaning to me, not overarching like genres or top tens or any of that stuff. Although I had thought about doing something like that just for something a little bit different. So for today, I thought, you know what, we're going into October, and 'tis the season for Halloween and monsters, and a lot of people I'm subscribed to on YouTube are big into Halloween and horror and slasher movies and all that stuff. And this is the time of the year where I really see a lot of their content drive towards that. Boogie, as of at least of this podcast, he put up a video showing like the $5,000 he spent on decorations for his lawn, and it looks pretty cool. But the thing is, I'm not a Halloween guy. I've never been one. I never cared about dressing up. I never got excited for the holiday. Trick-or-treating, yeah, it was cool as a kid, and yeah, it was cool when I was 13 and 14 just trying to hold on to it. But, the whole horror thing never really stuck to me, and that really goes into gaming for me as well. Not the biggest horror fan. And it's not because I don't enjoy being scared. It's just the genre has just never jumped and appealed to me the same way that RPGs appeal to me, the same way that those suspenseful crime dramas and point and clicks and stuff like that have appealed to me. Horror is kind of a new thing for me. And what I really wanted to talk about is, why is that? I feel like I'm missing out on something because I don't hold, Silent Hill on a certain, I don't want to say pedestal, but pedestal that a lot of people have it to. I've watched tons of videos on the lore and the background and why it's a great game, why it's an excellent story, why the characters are so in depth, and why the horror is absolutely terrifying. And it all sounds great. And then I play it and it just does not click. And I really do feel like I'm missing out on something. And it is something I wanted to kind of talk about. Why is that? So I think really to kick this off, I have to go back to where horror really stands with me, as a person. As a kid, I never really cared for horror movies, as I said. It comes to, I even say cartoons. I never really cared for like Scooby-Doo and stuff like that, with monsters and what. I've never really been into that. If Scooby-Doo was on, for instance, I'd watch it. Casper the Friendly Ghost, okay, whatever. But, you could honestly say that really doesn't count as horror. But it just never really got me. It was kind of just like it was there. It was in the background. Casper the Friendly Ghost or Woody Woodpecker. I would go with Woody Woodpecker or Chili Penguin, whatever, something like that. But with horror movies growing up, primarily in the 80s, really none of them stood out to me. I knew who Freddy was. I knew who Jason was. I'd never seen Friday the 13th until I was, I think, in high school. Never seen A Nightmare on Elm Street until I was closer to college, actually. And never seen a Halloween up until college. Evil Dead, pretty much everybody kind of got into that around the college time anyway because of, Bruce Campbell being Bruce Campbell. And even Army of Darkness, hadn't seen that until college either. So it's kind of strange. Like looking back at it, everybody has nostalgia for these films. And I've seen them, but I don't really have that nostalgia. I just have the, oh yeah, I saw that. But really the horror movie that scared me to death as a kid, and probably maybe this is really what kind of deterred me to the whole genre in the first place, was the original Child's Play. Now, as a kid, I had not seen it in the theater. I had seen it like on, I guess, TNT or Turner Network Television or something. I have no idea. Heavily edited, standard cable, regular television, what have you. But just being able to see the animatronics at that time. Now, mind you, we look at special effects like that today, and it's kind of cheesy, although I do have a soft spot for the practicality of it. As a kid, scared shitless. I had nightmares over that damn doll. And even reached a point where my parents had like a field day with it. They'd be like, "Oh no, look out, it's Chucky." And it was so frightening to me. It was just I ran out of rooms. I broke out in tears every time there was a preview or a trailer for the next sequel or something along those lines dealing with dolls coming to life and killing people. I would hide in the closet, which is probably the worst place for a young kid of like 8 years old to hide is in the closet, because then all it really takes is somebody on the outside to go, "Oh, I saw the boogeyman go in there," and then you literally just shit yourself in the darkness, and it's not a good time for anybody. But, from that, really, I'd say the only time I really got into ghosts and stuff like that was the real Ghostbusters. And even then, that really wasn't scary. And I really don't consider the real Ghostbusters like a horror comedy. Some people actually classify it as that. I really don't. I see it as more of a comedy. Ghostbusters 2 especially, and I haven't seen the new one. But when it comes to video games, honestly, the NES, I now know of Sweet Home and I guess you could say the predating it has to Resident Evil and all that. But I really only played like Castlevania. And even then, I never really classified Castlevania as a horror game. I always classified it more as an action game. Yeah, you were fighting Frankenstein, Giant Bat, Medusa heads, Count Dracula. Yeah, it borrowed from the stuff that a lot of people associate with horror. But as a kid, I never really saw it like that. I kind of saw it just more of a like an action game. And that's really it. That's really where my horror roots lie as a kid. And I just never really got into the genre. And to me, I find it kind of unfortunate. Now, when we get to the Super Nintendo, though, I played Zombies Ate My Neighbors. Um, and I thought it was fun. I thought it was cheesy. I thought it was campy. Maybe it was where I was at the time. That whole, like, B movie 3D glasses thing was on the rise, and again, for whatever reason, reading the Disney Afternoon Daily Digest or whatever it was that they used to sell in the supermarket next to the Inquirer and the Daily Sun. Um, but again, I never really associated that with horror. After all was said and done with these things, as a kid, I never watched horror movies still. Even though everybody was talking about Hellraiser, even though everybody was talking about the latest Jason movie. I think at one point, with Jason Goes to Hell, had no interest whatsoever. To be totally honest with you, the only time I actually was somewhat excited for a horror movie as a kid, well, more so high schoolish, was An American Werewolf in London, and that really wasn't a horror movie at all. It was just a very bad comedy. It was a horror romance comedy. It was a rom-com from hell. It was terrible. But the PlayStation, I would say, is really where I started to notice the genre a little bit more than I did previously. And it was kind of strange, to be honest. It was really because of magazines, it was because of hearsay, it was because of Resident Evil. And when I initially read about Resident Evil, and I think I may have discussed this in a video, I honestly had no idea what it was. I knew it was a very violent game. I knew it was gory, and people told me it was scary. And as somebody who really didn't care for horror, not because of the scare factor, just never appealed to me, I was kind of intrigued because I had never seen video games as scary. Never. And I wanted to experience that for myself. And I was of an age where, the ESRB was now having, the E's, the T's, the M's. I think we were past the MA-17s at that point. And I wasn't able to purchase it because I was underage. So I went to the only Funko Funko Games in New York City, which was at the top of the Manhattan Mall, which is now no longer there, obviously. Walked in, asked if they had Resident Evil. They had it used, and back then buying used games was kind of strange. It'd be like, oh, we have it used. It was like, ooh, used. Don't you have it new? It wasn't like how we see with GameStop today, where you walk in and you buy new and then they give you an open case and people wig out about that. Back then for me, buying used games was kind of like a taboo thing. It was more so I would rather get it new, if possible. Because back then, too, the trail after a game release was a lot longer, too. You were still able to buy NES games like Zelda and Metroid like 10 years after they came out. Like, they were just in constant production, or they were overproduced to the point where they could continue to sell new games. Now, not so much because of the economy that we live in. But, the idea of buying a used game back then to me was kind of foreign. And even my mom, who had to buy it for me, she was like, "Ugh, like you, like it was, it's like it's different now. It's like buying a used car. It's kind of just accepted." But the guy was like, "Listen, this is the only one we have. It's a tough game to find. It's very violent." And he made it a point to tell my mom that. My mom's like, "Well, I think my son is somewhat adult. I think it's kind of stupid that I have to come here with him just to buy this stupid game. What is it about anyway?" She had no idea. It was called Resident Evil. She thought it was about real estate. So there we have it. Bought Resident Evil, and I think I got the strategy guide while I was there too. Pop it in, watch that horrible, horrible live action FMV-ish style intro with Albert Wesker wearing sunglasses at night and adjusting his hair. And Rebecca Chambers, who really just looked like she did not want to be there. And of course, who could forget Chris Redfield before the roids? It was just all so badly done, and even like the special effects for the live action with I guess it's not a spoiler, I guess, with the dogs and whatnot, was just so cheesy. But again, that's what I grew up with. Seeing these horror movies like that back in the 80s, they were absolutely terrifying. The cheesiness factor, that 90s retro, overacted silliness was in. It made sense. Looking back at it now, I shake my head and I grimace in fear because it is so bad. Hey, look, I guess I like horror. I didn't find the game particularly scary, to be totally honest with you. It was basically just a guy or a girl stuck in a giant house with a bunch of zombies and these terrible controls. But I loved it. It was so much fun. And I think I did have the strategy guide because I literally went page by page and I did not deviate whatsoever, which is a real deterrence to the game. And to this day, I actually feel like if you're going to play a horror-related thing, do not use a walkthrough. If you're looking for the scares, if you're looking for the chills, you're looking for that suspenseful feeling, you're doing yourself a disservice by looking at a strategy guide. If you get stuck on a puzzle and you really want to move on and see what happens, okay, fine, that's another thing. But don't sit there going page by page or scroll by scroll or sit there looking with your phone in one hand and the control in the other. You're taking away from the suspense. You're taking away from that aspect of horror that you're really looking for. So Resident Evil 1 wasn't that scary, for me at least, but it was enjoyable. It was fun. But I never really looked into Silent Hill or anything like that. And I think it was really because we were still in that age where we didn't have the internet as prominently as we do now. And magazines, for me at least, were the way I found out about new releases. They were the way I found about stuff coming down the pipeline, etc., etc. And looking at the cover of Silent Hill, the US one that is, it told me absolutely nothing. It didn't look engaging to me as a kid. The back of the box, they had to use fog, which because of all the graphical technology going on, but they used that to their advantage at Konami. At Team Silent rather, they used that to establish a deeper fear, a deeper sense of suspense. An unknown in the distance. I wanted none of that, in all honesty. And looking back now, again, this is why I feel like I'm missing out, because I still have no interest to go back and play it. I have since played Silent Hill, the Memories one that was on the Wii. The name is escaping me. Give me one sec. I'm just going to do a quick look up on Amazon Silent Hill Wii. Shattered Memories. I've played through this game twice, actually. I really enjoyed what they did in terms of the way the game kind of adapts to the way you play Harry. But really, it's not that scary either, to me, at least. It's more annoying for the chase sequences. But anyway, I digress. The original Silent Hill was doing a lot of really cool things at that time, and it was something I did not care to partake in. It really wasn't until Resident Evil 2 that I actually started to get scared at these horror games, and I discovered the tried, the true, and the tested jump scare. Obviously, now it has a name. As a kid, it was more so that first scene in the beginning. I know Steven had mentioned it a few episodes back when we discussed music, and he had played the piano theme that plays in the save room. And again, that music is the absolute essence of you're going to be okay. You're safe here. No more jump scares. No more zombies. No more nemesis. No more anything. But in the beginning of Resident Evil 2, I remember playing it with my friends, two friends actually. We brought it back to my house. It was sometime in the afternoon. We closed up the blinds. We turned off the lights. We popped in the game, and that first jump scare, I think it's in the police station, where the zombie literally just pokes its arm right outside the window. All three of us screamed like I don't even want to know, like birds in mating. It was loud. It was high pitched. I think my mom came in thinking somebody died. That was pretty much the first time a video game had ever scared me, to be completely honest. It had just never happened before. And it was something cool. It was something unique. And it's actually really cool that Resident Evil managed to do that. Because even for years where I really wasn't paying attention to, your horror games, the cult classics like Haunting Ground and Clock Tower, and I guess you could technically say The Calling. I have that game now, and I think it's kind of eerie to say the least. But I Resident Evil 2 always held a special spot. Even when I got back into collecting, and I really wasn't looking at the horror games that much, I wanted to get a copy of Resident Evil 2 because it did hold a very special place for me, being able to experience that first video game jump scare, technically, for me and my two friends who lived in my building at the time. Now, Resident Evil 3 and 4 came out. I really didn't care. Eternal Darkness came out on the GameCube. Didn't care. Resident Evil 5 came out. I bought it way after release because a friend of mine wanted to play a co-op, and that game isn't scary at all. But through the years, as I've been in YouTube and, going through the community and just seeing what everybody has to offer in terms of content and recommendations and whatnot, horror games constantly come up. Silent Hill, Condemned, Layers of Fear. Some people say Dear Esther is kind of an eerie game. I don't think so. Some people say, Rapture, Everybody's Gone to the Rapture is technically somewhat of a suspense horror. I don't think that either. The Calling I mentioned, Ju-on the Grudge, which is awful. Don't even bother. What else do we have? Technically, I guess we could also say Obscure, which I recently discovered, actually, which is pretty much like that 90s scream horror that everybody, at least in my generation, that we grew up with. And to an extent, it's kind of a guilty pleasure. We all admit it's terrible, but, at the time, it was really fun. It was really enjoyable. But, now, watching YouTube and, getting these insights and trying to experience as many different genres as I can, I obviously have my favorites. I love JRPGs, I love rhythm games, I love action games, I love a good suspense game. I love those cinematic games from Mr. Cage that nobody likes, pretty much because they're more movies than games and people feel like he should make movies, although I don't think he could pull it off. I think he needs that medium. Through all that, horrors kind of just escape me. I would say when Until Dawn came out, that was something really, really cool for me, and it was definitely eye-opening. It combined three things that I really enjoy in games these days. I love decision-making, where your ramifications will, your choose your own adventure aspect, where you can say, oh, I'll save so-and-so, but then they die, and the story just continues. Or you choose to go down the right path, not knowing what goes down the left path, and the story will still continue. But then something will happen if you replay the game, go down the left and not the right. I love that. It definitely encourages replay value. Stuff like Heavy Rain, for instance, where it does have a means to an end, and even Until Dawn, it may not have the same gravity that it has when you play through it the first time, but it does add an extra layer where you get more of a total picture. It had that. It had that cinematic experience. The mocap on the mouths and the faces, the actors looked like they were in the game. That technology was absolutely incredible. And it was a suspenseful game. Now, the only thing in horror movies that actually ever made me somewhat frightened is when you're being chased. I don't really find gore all that disgusting. I'll turn my head and go, ugh. Unless it's the eyes. If it's the eyes, I tend to freak out. I have a thing with eyes. I don't know what it is. But Until Dawn did a really good job of keeping you in the dark, giving you that 90s scream horror essence where, it's a bunch of, sexy hot co-eds, in the mountains at a ski resort or a cottage, whatever the heck it was. And it's like, there's going to be some trouble. Wink, wink, hunch, hunch. Oh, shit, somebody died. And everything goes from there. And they're not overacting. And at least for me, I was totally invested. I wanted to see what happened. You want to know who's going to die, who's going to live, who's the killer, who's this? Is it the Necronomicon? Is it a vampire? Is it a ghost? Is it something from the great beyond? What is it? It just continues to drive you forward. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. And I just found out they're actually making a new game coming out this October of 2017 that's a cop suspense drama. And it encourages gameplay by using cell phones for folks that like to play in groups to make the decisions, which is something I do with my girlfriend. That is absolutely genius. Now, mind you, I know nothing else about the game other than that, but that is brilliant. I think that is definitely the way horror games should go when it comes to the future in terms of that cinematic experience, because people tend to, at least for me, when you want to watch something horror related, part of the excitement is being with a group of people. I personally think. I've seen all the Saw movies in the theater, unfortunately, and I always went with at least one person. And it's one of those things where, you get grossed out and you look over at the other person and you see they're equally grossed out, or they're not even flinching, and then you think there's some kind of masochistic monster. But Until Dawn just did a lot of really cool things on that, and I'm really looking forward to this game they have coming out. But before that, and I'm getting ahead of myself, that's really where I tend to enjoy horror the most. That suspense factor. Which is really why I tend to say I enjoy suspense more than I enjoy horror. Let me give you an idea here. The real first, I guess you could say, next-gen, quote-unquote, horror game that I got into was probably more suspense than anything. And that was Condemned: Criminal Origins on the Xbox 360. Now, if you have not played this game, it's relatively cheap. I think it's backwards compatible, and I believe it's on Steam. You basically play a cop who is investigating a series of serial murder cases. Starts off like a cop drama. I tend to enjoy those. You do a little police investigation. You get to examine evidence, and then you get to see this delirium and this degrading of the human mind and delusions and gore and not knowing what's around the corner. And, did this really happen? You definitely see, somebody who is in essence pure and good just degrade down into something deep, dark, somewhat evil, depending on how you play the game. That was by far the most terrifying thing I had ever played up until that point, because I wasn't able to quantify, oh, I'm supposed to be scared at this point, or okay, I get it. They're trying to go for a dark atmosphere, but it's not really clicking with me. This fired on all cylinders for me. And honestly, I think probably the big crux to it, not the big crux, the big attribute that it had going for it, for me at least, was the fact that it painted itself as a cop drama to start. And then it goes down this whole different route. And that was something I'd only seen in movies up until that point. And that's really why I think the horror genre is really taken on its own for me now that we've entered into the Xbox 360, Xbox One, PS3, PS4, and the Wii, The Wii U had Resident Evil Revelations, which is a great Resident Evil game, and the Switch and PC. We're now at the point where we have VR at our disposal and all these other things. If you have the money for it, you can have the money for it. I can see the immersion being a lot more exciting for me, as opposed to just using tank controls wandering through a mansion, or a first-person view holding up a PDA looking for fingerprints. But Criminal Origins is a phenomenal game, and I really think it's very dated at this point. But I definitely think it's worth a look. I did not care for the sequel. The sequel kind of abandoned all of that, and it went more so for a more visceral combat system, which was in the first one, but now there was more of it. There was a PvP element to it. It went more for the jump scares. It wasn't so much about that deep, dark, brooding atmosphere for me at that point. Actually, come to think of it, if we're talking about atmosphere and really inspiring a little bit of a sense of terror, I would even throw BioShock into this mix as something that doesn't really inspire terror, but it definitely fills you with a sense of suspense because you really don't know what to expect around each turn with these jacked up assholes that are running around Rapture. The beginning of the game, actually I'm not going to spoil that, but the beginning of the game, you're kind of just thrown into this wondrous, unknown underwater Atlantis, palace, city, whatever you want to call it, utopia. And you don't know what to expect. You are just one person wandering around in a world that you do not know. The whole concept of Brave New World. You don't know what to expect, and that's really the biggest sense of terror and fear you can get. Which is why I say do not play these games with a walkthrough. You're taking away that essence. You're taking away that fear of the unknown. That's really a driving factor when it comes to these games, and unfortunately for me, it took me a very long time to learn that and not sit there with a book or some sort of walkthrough. But really, BioShock I think is a really good example of that. And the latest Resident Evil. Wow. That definitely took me by complete surprise. They definitely capitalized, Capcom at least, on the fact that Konami doesn't know what they're doing anymore and decided to cancel PT. Now, PT was absolutely terrifying to start. When I heard about it, I made it a point to download it. And I told my girlfriend, when I get home, we're going to play this crazy horror game from Hideo Kojima. And I'm pretty sure she may have rolled her eyes when she read that text message because he's my boy. She understands I really enjoy his stuff, but she also, I think, thinks he's a little bit eccentric and I get a little bit too fanboyish over things that really aren't that important to begin with. Got home, closed the blinds, turned off the windows, lit a candle. I said, this is the only way we can experience this game. I kid you not, I could not finish it. I was putting the controller down, I was pausing it, I was standing up. I had never, ever been so terrified in my life. The imagery was grotesque. The use of darkness, the use of shadows, the fact that people are still discovering things hidden within this game years later. I couldn't take it. I was like, I can't finish it. I can't. And it was borderline nerve-wracking and comedic all at the same time. Somebody who is not into horror games is absolutely terrified. Somebody who doesn't really get scared at this stuff is absolutely terrified. That to me is something really, really powerful when it comes to game design, and Hideo Kojima hit it on all cylinders. Now, Resident Evil 7, Capcom took that and they rolled with it. And unfortunately, and fortunately, at one point I was thinking, it'd be kind of cool if this was a little bit more like the old Resident Evil. You kind of wanted that. I haven't played 6, so I can't really speak to the backlash of it. 5 I did co-op, and that was just because it was co-op, so I really have no right to complain about that. And I never played 4. I kind of wished it was a little bit like 1, a little bit like 2, and a little bit like 0, which I actually enjoyed. But then I thought about it. This is what terrifies me. Foreboding atmosphere, suspense, tension. That is really what gets me. I don't need the gory imagery. I don't need the phallic imagery. I don't need all the sexual innuendo connotation to make me feel uncomfortable, because Silent Hill 2 and 3 do have some of that going on. I just need to have an atmosphere that ultimately makes me feel uncomfortable and makes me feel powerless. And that is something that these two particular games did, which is something that Eternal Darkness didn't do for me at all, which is also a beloved horror game. Now, admittedly, I came a little bit late to the party, and the game itself was something that did something very unique at the time in terms of playing with the player. Playing with the player. That makes tons of sense, Alex. Kind of, I would say, toying with the player's mind, toying with their concept of, oh no, the game crashed, or what's wrong with my TV. Technology has progressed a little bit at this point, so some of these little mind game tricks don't really work anymore. And for me, when I played through it a few years ago, it became more of a nuisance than anything. And this was a game, again, just trying to immerse myself into this horror. I played it at night with the lights out only. And it was during a very, very hot summer. And the only thing in the background would be the air conditioning because New York is disgustingly humid. So trust me, it had to happen. Although I do imagine if I left the AC off, it would create a sense of uncomfortableness, which I really do think is the purpose of these games in the first place. But I ain't sweating balls on a leather couch, all right? Just leaving it at that. But I didn't find it scary. I didn't find it terrifying. I found the story kind of intriguing, but ultimately it was cheesy. It didn't do anything to startle me. It honestly it just annoyed me. And that's really, again, I feel like I really just couldn't get into horror games because of where gaming was and where my whole honest appeal of horror games is. But that being said, every October I make it a point to try to play horror games just to try to get into this Halloween spirit because a lot of my friends are really into it, into this holiday, and it's never clicked with me. And I really do feel like I'm missing out on something critical. Now, mind you, I'm Mr. Christmas, but you know, I everybody gets hyped for it. My girlfriend likes to dress up. I really don't care. I'll dress up if I have to. It's not something I really, I don't plan my costume or my decorations 8 months in advance like some of these Halloween fanatics. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just never clicked, and it definitely carried over into, I would say, my earlier days of video gaming. But now that I have my own personal definition of really what I look for in a horror game, that suspense factor, that fear of the unknown, that, not knowing what's going on and purposely keeping myself in the dark like I did with Resident Evil 7 is really the best way for me to approach the genre as a whole. So as of today, we're coming into October, and I kind of just wanted to do a little discussion on this. Um, Again, I could have done this on the YouTube channel, but in terms of visual elements, there really are none. I feel like maybe this sort of just talk generally is a little bit more geared towards a podcast. But before we close out, I did want to go over a couple games within like this weird horror system that I happen to enjoy. Just for some insight, and of course, if you guys have any recommendations or something I may have overlooked, definitely feel free to chime in the comments or however which way, or on Facebook. I'm still learning all the lingo here. But obviously, I already mentioned Condemned Criminal Origins. I think that's a phenomenal game. It may be a little bit dated at this point. It's like $2 at GameStop, though. You can't go wrong. It's definitely on sale on PC quite often with all the Steam sales. And I think it does a really good job of just establishing like that real, cop suspense. Is this supernatural? Is this in his head? Is this in my head? Sort of thing. Also, another game that I think technically did a really good job at the whole horror thing is Diablo. Diablo 2, specifically Diablo 1. That's more the gore factor thing. But if you go into the lore that Blizzard originally established, not so much the lore in Diablo 3, which is borderline fan service, and I'm not knocking it, I still love it. They really went into the whole satanic thing, and to me that's that it's not unnerving, but it's kind of scary if you think about it. Like maybe to paint like a slight of a picture of me, I went to Catholic school growing up, and my honestly, I didn't even touch on this. As an adult, my favorite horror movie today, which is considered to be probably one of the cheesiest horror movies now, is The Exorcist. Going into Catholic school and, being Catholic school, I saw it around that time, and it made me think. It's like, okay, so priests perform exorcisms, and, of course we learned about this, in theology class through the history and all that stuff. And one day, I decided to ask one of the teachers there who happened to be a priest, and I said, Father, have you ever performed an exorcism? And he gave me the strangest, most terrifying look. We're not allowed to speak about that. I was shitting bricks. I he it was it's like acknowledging it, but not acknowledging it. And impressionable age, what have you. But it was a movie that I actually found somewhat terrifying, only because I was like, oh my god, I go to school that with these guys and they teach us, this must be real. It's documented that, exorcisms were performed and all these other things. And it scared the bejesus out of me, especially when this particular teacher told me we're not allowed to talk about that. And what's the first thing I do when I go home? I watch The Exorcist again because I'm an idiot, and then I proceed to play Diablo 2, which is pretty much demons everywhere and resurrecting of Satan. It's oh, like God, just I don't know what I was thinking. But again, it's not like I purposely went out seeking these things. But other than Condemned and Diablo, I think really another game that really hones in with me, obviously Resident Evil 2. But the more modern games, I really enjoy the use of suspense and horror that's portrayed in Until Dawn, as I discussed. Um, Another horror game that I really enjoyed was on the DS, and it is known as Thracia. This is a particularly strange game, actually. It's a first-person dungeon crawler slash visual novel. And it has some really, I don't want to say boring puzzles, but kind of disgusting puzzles. And basically, without spoiling much of anything, and it being on the DS, obviously graphical prowess isn't really the strongest thing at this point. But the use of ambient music, the use of very dark, drab colors, the use of not knowing why you, as this girl, are in what appears to be a sort of concentration camp and what went on here and what you're searching for and these strange memories. It's very unnerving, and I think the game is somewhat rare at this point. I don't know how much it costs. It's not the best game in the world. So please, if it is really expensive and it's like $150 or whatever it is, don't be like, I have to buy this now. It is not that good. It's very choppy. It's very, I don't know if it's deliberate. It's not the smoothest experience in the world, but playing that portably, one would think that it really takes away from that essence of horror or suspense. It really doesn't, especially if you have a decent pair of headphones and you're sitting on the subway, which is where I primarily played this. There was a few times I looked up at some of the dialogue and I was like, "Ho! Ho ho!" Like this is a little bit out of left field. Like this is a bit much. And even some of the puzzles, if you mess them up, you physically get hurt and you actually bleed. But, the real standout horror game to me on the DS, admittedly I never played Dementium, and I think Moon is considered a horror game as well. The original Virtue's Last Reward game, 999, 9 persons, 9 hours, 9 doors. This is a pure visual novel, I'll say, with some puzzle elements in there, but it came out around about the same time that Saw was in the theaters. Maybe a little bit before, maybe a little bit after. And when I saw that in the theater, I really enjoyed it. Not because of a horror movie. It's just something hadn't been done at that time. The whole concept of an escape room, a game of, life and death. And 999 really embodies that. And it permeates throughout this entire trilogy. But I will be honest with you. Obviously everybody knows the series by now. The DS game has since been ported to iOS. It's on PC. It's on the Vita. I think it's on the PS4 too at this point. It's also been redone, I believe, with obviously high-res graphics and voiceovers. The series takes a little bit of a drastic turn from the second and third volume, where it's not so much about suspense and horror anymore. It's more about I don't want to spoil it, but the second two games aren't half as horror driven. They're more of a like just a general mystery. But if you're into something that's a little bit grotesque, a little bit suspenseful, and honestly has a really good overarching story, definitely look into 999. I think that's another really good handheld entry. On the PS2 though, there is a game called Ghost Hunter that I would also like to give like a little mention to. Not the best. It's a third-person shooter. It's kind of like I think Ghostbusters is. It's pretty cheesy to be totally honest with you, but it's pretty fun. Actually, another good one. Maybe not so much horror in terms of the scary aspect, but definitely kind of funny though. Going back to that example of Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters on the Xbox 360, PS3, phenomenal game. That is definitely Ghostbusters 3, from what I understand. Dan Aykroyd, he helped pen the script to that, from what I understand. I'm not sure if Harold Ramis had passed away at that point. He actually, honestly, I had no idea Dan Aykroyd was as into the supernatural as he was up until I played that game, and they had some behind the scenes. I was like, oh, he seems like he knows what he's saying. Oh, wow, his family is really big into this. I had no idea. And it's kind of interesting to see that because to me, he doesn't look like somebody that would really be into this sort of thing. But I think just to close this all out in a roundabout sort of way, I think horror games have really evolved to a point where, I am now able to partake and enjoy them. While I wasn't able to before because the medium never spoke to me. And even with the movies, they didn't really speak to me because I think I just grew up in that age where it was all about the gore scares. And it was, and then we went to the whole jump scare thing with the Scream movies. But now we're up into, I guess, like this arena of let's try to make the person as uncomfortable as possible. Let's have them second guess everything. Let's have them not really know what happened here. And I think that's where movies like the original Saw kind of exceeded. It had that gore, but you really had no idea what was going on. And the whole concept of being stuck in a room and being forced to do something absolutely grotesque is just frightening. And if I can mention another movie that I really feel is kind of a horror movie to me, at least, the original Alien. Now, it may be classified as more of a sci-fi movie, or maybe just a thriller. I always found it more to be a horror film for me personally because of that suspense factor. It's literally a bunch of guys versus one thing, and that one thing is more powerful than all the guys, and you don't know where they are. And you definitely got to see this in Alien Isolation, which admittedly, when I finally did get around to playing it, I really didn't care for it. It was a little bit too unforgiving for my taste. But let me tell you, that game knows how to do suspense so well. The AI that they employed for the Xenomorph is genius. It knows where you are literally at all times. And the way the AI is designed, it's designed to toy with you intentionally so that you're constantly on the move. You don't want to make noise. It knows where you are. It's not stupid. You think, by not moving the AI, like perception percentage or something goes down. No, 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 no. It knows perfectly well that you're there, and it will purposely stop in front of you or stop next to you and do the whole like blah, blah, blah thing, which scares you and annoys you all at the same time, but it's all cleverly calculated. And that's really why I think the horror genre for me can only go up from here. And I'm really hoping that this October I'll be able to get into a few as well. Steven and I are planning to play one for another mini-sode that should be coming up shortly after the two of us finish the games that we're playing, which actually I totally neglected to discuss games I'm playing. Currently playing Yakuza Kiwami. Phenomenal. I really think they did a good job with this whole ground-up restoration, and I love the little tie-ins that they did into Yakuza 0, just to kind of bridge the two, since Yakuza 0 is technically a newer old entry prequel in the entire Yakuza series. Playing this so I can get into Yakuza 6 when it releases next year. Also playing Utawara Romano and the Mask of Truth on the PlayStation Vita. Part 2 of Part 2, technically. And I'm about 10 hours in as of this recording. And I gotta say, as much as I had thought that they weren't going to go back to all the life building stuff, there's still a lot of that. But the writing, oh my god. Kicked up 20 paces. 20 paces. And I thought the writing in the first game was just as good. Also playing Everybody's Golf. It's a fun little time waster, and Destiny 2. But as I was saying before I got into that, Steven and I are going to be doing a mini-sode on a horror game upcoming, and I'm hoping to squeeze in a few more myself. I did pick up White Day. From what I understand, that's a Korean horror game. It looks really interesting to me. I think it's all first person. Graphically, it looks a little dated, but let's see. Everybody says it's actually really scary. Oh, one glaring omission. One glaring omission. Corpse Party. Now, Corpse Party is an interesting game that I have to say. Graphically, it is like a 16-bit RPG Maker game, and you may think, how could this possibly be scary? And I've said this before. The localization that XE did, everything sounds like something that I personally would say when put in those situations. The anime, or the illustration rather, is grotesque when it needs to be. It is disturbing when it needs to be. But the highlight of that entire game is the sound design. When they say bones crunching and mushed into a soft, gooey paste, the sound of bone is... I don't know how they do this. They must have taken like 1,000 chicken bones and just smashed them over a piece of wood and then put them into a grinder, like a mortar, and just grinded them out until they become like a soft gooey. It is disgusting and it is unnerving. You have to play that game with headphones. Let me tell you, the game itself really wasn't all that scary. Some parts, again, the illustrations were disturbing, but some of the sounds, I put down the Vita and I was just like, oh Lord, oh, I am never eating pudding again. Oh, that is disgusting. Like, definitely something to look into. But that's really going to do it for this mini-sode. Again, this is just something I wanted to do as a little aside, get a little bit something else out there because I have nothing else to do and I wanted to do something a little bit more creative, ish, as it were. So I thought maybe this would be just like an interesting little mini discussion on my background in horror and what I technically look for in a horror game, and maybe, inspire you guys to check out a few titles I mentioned here. Obviously a lot of them are, the ones Resident Evil, Silent Hill, but something like Thracia. I know a lot of people haven't played, and a lot of people know of Corpse Party, but I know a lot of people haven't played it because every time I mention it, they go, oh, I haven't played that one. And I think it's definitely worth time. Everybody knows 999, but I think a lot of people got caught into the whole Virtue's Last Reward and Zero Escape, which is very, very different from 999. 999 is definitely a lot more scary on that standpoint. But anyway, that's going to do it for this mini episode of Another Gaming Podcast. I've been Alex, and we'll hopefully all be back for the next one. See you.